At the edge of the cave, the focus has been on logistics, mitigating risk, and racing the weather. But for the rest of the world, the 12 boys and their soccer coach below have been the focus, never more so than tonight, now that 4 of them are finally free, rescued earlier today. And this is a live look at the hospital where they are now being treated, with preparations already in hand for the others. That is if everything goes
window of opportunity. The boys, all wearing full face masks, were guided through the flooded underground labyrinth, a treacherous 4-kilometer journey that took hours. But in the end, the rescuers exceeded their own expectations, bringing the 4 boys out in less time than practice runs had suggested it would take. The rescue commander praised the boys, the divers, and all those who have offered support. But he also sounded a note of caution. Restocking the cave with fresh oxygen tanks will take 10 hours at least. And with more heavy monsoon rains coming, there are no guarantees of success in what he calls the war against time and water. Even so, today was a victory. The boys were flown to the nearby city of Chiang Rai and then rushed by ambulance to hospital where an entire floor has been reserved for them. They'll be tested for malnutrition, dehydration, and crucially, oxygen levels. Officials have said levels in the cave have plummeted dangerously, possibly as low as just 15%. As for the families, joy and relief for relatives of the 4 boys now safely above ground, even though it will be several days before they can go home. For the families of those still trapped, the excruciating anxiety goes on. But meanwhile, down in the cave, the remaining 8 boys and their coach have been told of today's success, so they know the basic rescue plan works. But their challenge now will be to remain positive, as rescuers warn it could take up to 4 days to get them all out. And that's if the heavy rains hold off long enough. As for the boys who are now out of the cave and in the hospital in Chiang Rai, it will be a long road ahead. Even the strongest boys are likely very weak. They were in the dark in that cave for 9 days before the rescuers found them. During that time, there was very little to eat, and they were drinking water from the stalactite formations. While they're in the hospital here, the doctors will be examining their health and doing a number of tests, but they'll also be assessing their mental health. They went through a horrific ordeal during those 16 days, and the psychological implications of that could last much longer than the physical one.
Here, they have a grueling journey ahead of them, at least 4 hours. It starts by plunging into an underground passageway. Immediately, the current will tug at them. That water is the color of coffee with cream, and lamplight barely pierces it. Each boy is accompanied by 2 rescue divers. One takes the lead, linked to the boy by tether, carrying his air supply. Another follows behind him, in part to ensure he doesn't stray. The passage isn't a straight line. There are blind alleys and dead ends. After a few hundred meters, there's the so-called Pattaya beach. It's called that because usually there's a dry section here and an air pocket, but it also signals tough challenges ahead. The tunnel can narrow dramatically, including at what's described as a crisis point, where it juts upwards to an opening about half a meter across. That's all. The group will have to shimmy through, pushing their air tanks ahead of them. Eventually, the cave comes to a T-junction. The team will take a right. It's not that far now to Chamber 3, the location of the rescue operations forward base. But it's far from safe. On Friday, Thai Navy diver Saman Gunan was on his way back to that base when he lost consciousness, fatally.
They were stranded in the cave for more than 2 weeks.
Navy SEALs, international diving teams, and military crews are helping navigate the cave and rescue the boys and their soccer coach. Heavy downpours, though, in northern Thailand have affected the latest efforts. Authorities say that they're continuing to pump out water from the cave so crews can reach the group. CBS News foreign correspondent Ben Tracy is following the story for us from Chiang Rai, Thailand, near the rescue operations. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning. So the good news is you mentioned those heavy downpours. It's actually quite dry here now. We had some heavy downpours yesterday and early this morning, but today they really are catching a break from the weather. So that means there's not a lot of water going back into that cave, and the water continues to be pumped out. That will make the journey out of the cave for the remaining 8 boys and the coach that are still in there much safer. It'll make it a little easier than it was yesterday for the first 4 that did get out. The other good news is we are told just in the last hour by officials here that those 4 boys who were rescued, they're at the hospital. He says when they came out of the cave, they were hungry, but they were healthy. He says they are safe and they are strong. So that's a good indication that apparently they have survived. At least these 4 boys have really weathered this ordeal, this harrowing ordeal of being in this cave for nearly 2 weeks pretty well.
Ben, there were several different scenarios that these rescue teams decided as they were planning this very dangerous operation. Obviously, now they've decided to bring the boys out with a combination of using oxygen tanks. But describe for our viewers some of the difficulty in reaching the boys and why there was even talk at some point of leaving them there until the monsoon season was over.
Yeah, they talked about leaving them in there for potentially 4 months. And the reason they were saying that is because this option, the option they're doing right as we speak, is not the preferred option. It is very dangerous. It is very risky. You were talking about taking young boys ages 11 to 16, putting a dive mask on them, putting them in dark, murky water, and having them swim underwater through a cave like a trained Navy SEAL. Now, they will have 2 divers on either side of them guiding them through that. One of the divers actually carrying the oxygen for these kids. But we can't understate how dangerous this is. And the fact that 4 of them actually survived it is pretty amazing, because keep in mind, just last Friday, a volunteer former Navy SEAL died inside that cave doing this very same thing. So this is not without risk, but they have decided that the risk of leaving them in there was greater. They originally thought maybe it could be a couple of months, but then oxygen started running low inside the cave. They worried that if the cave floods again, the little piece of real estate that they're currently clinging to would get smaller, as small as 108 square feet, and that they just might not be able to survive that and would actually drown. So this is the option they're going with now. So far, so good, but a lot of work to be done.
So you talked about how nice the weather is now, but I know it was raining overnight. And what's the forecast in the coming hours or the coming days?
Well, this is definitely the rainy season here, so you can expect that almost every day you're going to get some form of rain. What they have really avoided in the last couple of days, thank God, are these heavy, heavy downpours that last all day long and that can flood the cave. They did say that some of the rain that fell here yesterday did go into the cave, but it wasn't, they were able to pump out almost an equal amount of water, so the water level didn't rise dramatically inside the cave. That is good news, but they know it is only a matter of time before there is a major storm here, a major downpour that could flood that cave, that could make rescuing these boys nearly impossible. And then you could have a scenario where you have 3 or 4 or 2 or 1 still in there and the rescuer is not able to get to them.
So, Ben, we know that the first rescue took several hours, basically the entire day. Are we expecting a similar timeline today?
That's what they're telling us. They say that this operation, this second phase of the operation, began at 11 a.m. local time here. And the former governor here, who's kind of acting as the rescue mission chief, he said that we could expect what he called good news between 8 and 10 p.m. here tonight local time. That would be around 9 a.m. Or so Eastern time. So they are expecting that this could be another 11-hour or so operation. They did tell us originally that it would take 11 hours to get these boys out of the cave. But yesterday, that first group, they came out in less than 8 hours. So it was faster. It was more successful than they thought. That has given them confidence to launch phase 2. And they've actually added 5 more divers to this group of elite divers to try to speed this thing up.
Hey, I'm just kind of curious, Ben. You said they started at 11 o'clock. You would think that this would be the sort of operation they would want to start right away, first thing in the morning. Do you have any idea why they waited till 11?
Yeah, they actually, after they brought the first group of boys out, they have to go back into the cave and along the entire evacuation route, and keep in mind that's 2.5 miles long, they have to place oxygen tanks. And that's so there's enough oxygen for each child, for all of these SEALs or all of these elite divers to have enough oxygen inside the cave to get them out, and enough there in case something goes wrong and they end up in there longer than they thought. So that oxygen was all used up in the first round. They have to then go back in, take all those canisters out, put all new ones back in, and then they have to begin the journey about 6 hours from the mouth of the cave to where the boys are, and then you have somewhere around 8 to 11 hours of getting them out. So this is something that takes a very long time once they decide to launch the operation. So the lag time there was the time that they were replacing the oxygen, and then when they say we began the operation at 11, that means they went in to get the boys.
Ben, I know you've got a lot to do today, but I want to ask you before we let you go about the children that were selected, if there was even a selection process. Was it that they were chosen at random? Was it because they were thought to be the ones that were in weaker condition? And based on that, how are they doing now?
You know, there's some conflicting reports on that. Originally, they told us they were going to bring the strongest kids out first. And I think the thought process on that was they wanted more time to recuperate the ones who weren't as strong. But then we started hearing yesterday that they are actually going to bring out the weakest first because they wanted to make sure they got medical attention as quickly as possible. Frankly, we don't know. They have not officially released the identities of these boys, and even when they do, we don't know their condition. The hospital will have to release that at some point. They have not done that. These 4 boys are now at the hospital. They're under evaluation. They're actually in quarantine for the first 24 hours, so their families can't actually see them. The reason for that is they're afraid that after 16 days, 17 days inside this cave, their immune systems would be pretty weak. They don't want them exposed to any sort of viruses or things that could cause them complications. But those family reunions will eventually take place at the hospital once they get beyond that kind of initial evaluation period.
I do know, Ben, one of the reports that I read, perhaps in the New York Times, was that because a lot of people don't even realize that it took several days for people to even realize that the boys were missing along with their coach, and then another couple of days before they actually located them. And yet when they were located, the boys were in good spirits. Those are some of the reports that came back to us, and we just saw some of the images there. Certainly for their families, it must be heartbreaking, but what have you heard about how they're actually doing inside the cave?
Yeah, I mean, the glimpses that we've gotten are fairly positive. I mean, you saw that video when the rescuers first found them of the boys, and there were moments where they were smiling. There was even one where they were all introducing themselves and saying they're in good health. And one of the youngest boys, this little guy, he said, "Hey, you forgot about me," and then the camera pans over to him, which was kind of a nice moment to see that they were still acting that way, acting like children. And then I think the other glimpse that we've gotten that's maybe more significant just came the other day when the boys inside the cave wrote letters to their parents that were carried out by divers. And when you read those letters, they are talking about things like, when I get out of this cave, I want to eat fried chicken. Tell the teacher not to give me too much homework. Make sure you don't forget my birthday party. Those are things kids think about, and that's a good sign that they're not talking about that they're scared for their life or they're talking about how horrible it is in the cave. They're clearly focused on things that you would expect kids to be focused on.
Yeah, that's definitely sort of something positive. We're going to talk a little bit later on about the psychological impact of going through something like this. Ben, Tracy, thank you so much.
All right, with us
tonight, rescue teams in Thailand are working around the clock, scrambling to free a youth soccer team from the flooded cave. They've been trapped in for more than a week, just found alive yesterday. 2 Navy SEAL divers, a doctor and a nurse, are tending to the boys inside the pitch black cave now. Rescue crews have been bringing in food and water. Authorities there are looking at all of their options, none of them easy to get these boys home. Anna Corrin is out front in Thailand. So Anna, we're hearing that it could be months before the boys are rescued because of monsoon season. What's the latest there tonight?
For sure, Kate, they are preparing for these boys being trapped inside this cave for potentially 4 months. That's to sit out the rainy season. It's monsoon season here in Thailand. We've had a break in the weather, but they are expecting rain, heavy rains in the next couple of days. Now, they are pumping water furiously from the cave, hundreds of thousands of litres every single hour, and they are making progress, reducing those levels. But they are now looking at ways to get the boys out, perhaps using a full-face oxygen mask and being let out by those Navy SEALs. So if that happens, if they can get the boys feeling comfortable, this could happen a lot sooner than we expect. Now, as for their spirits, we understand that they are in good spirits, which is quite remarkable considering we are now entering day 11 of this saga. You mentioned those Navy SEALs. There are at least 7 to 10 Navy SEALs who have been by their side ever since they were discovered. And we also understand that there's a real camaraderie amongst these team members and that they are extremely resilient. But, Kate, as we know, they are desperate to get out and be reunited with their families.
It's remarkable they be in good spirits right now. Just remarkable. Anna, thank you so much. Tom Foreman's now out front. Tom, this is a system of caves, and it's more than 6 miles long, where the boys, where the cave, part of the cave where the boys were was 1 mile in, more than a mile in. Explain what rescue workers are working against.
They're working against darkness and cold and rushing water and time. Let's take a look at the structure of this mountain and the caves inside, what they have to deal with in terms of challenges there. This is where the boys went in. They're more than a mile into the mountainside, more than a half mile down, and there is, as far as we can tell, no really complete diagram of the inside of this cave, no really good map. But if we took a hypothetical cross-section, we can explain why the boys are trapped there and why it's so hard to get them out. Let's say they came in down here. As they walked through the cave, they would have gone up and down and up and down. And then when the monsoon rains rushed in, the water started filling in those gaps. And in some cases, as you can see right there, would have made it completely impassable. How many there are like this, we don't know. Are they as big as a house, big as a football field? We don't know. We just know the professional divers are taking quite a bit of time getting from here to there, and if they want to bring the boys back out that way, as Anna just mentioned, they face real challenges. First of all, some of these boys are unable to swim. So yes, a diver could tow someone through there, but he'd still have to be used to wearing a scuba mask and being underwater for perhaps quite a period of time. Some of this water is very murky. It's hard to see. There are heavy currents. There are cramped passageways, all of which complicate that process, and ultimately, all of which could lead to panic, Kate, which could be dangerous for both the rescuer and the person being rescued.
Absolutely. So what about the alternatives?
Well, Anna mentioned a few possibilities there. They could take the model from the Chilean rescue of 2010. Remember when those miners were caught underneath the ground there? They bored into the mountainside and were able to reach them and bring some of them out that way. But remember, there were 3 different boreholes, and it took more than 2 months before these happy reunion scenes finally occurred. So maybe they could go with another option, as, again, we heard a moment ago, keep supplying these kids, move them to maybe a slightly higher, safer platform there. But again, you're betting on the waters going down, and there's no sign that's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, betting on Mother Nature here is a scary thing. Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate it. Out front now, someone who knows, Ben Reminence. He's a cave diver on the ground in Thailand, part of the team trying to figure this all out. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time. You saw firsthand what the conditions are. Help us understand what it's like.
Imagine a Colorado River underwater and with zero visibility. These were the first days when we arrived there, so we had very little hope of getting there. But as the rain stopped, it got better. The visibility cleared up, and the current got less, and we actually made good headway. And we made those, like your reporter said, 1.5 miles into the cave to the place where the kids were.
How long did it take you to get in there?
4 hours.
Wow. You know, I spoke with one diver today who said that cave diving is tough for even some of the most experienced divers. It takes training, months of training. How difficult is it going to be to teach these kids how to dive when some of them don't even know how to swim, if that's what this comes down to?
In comparison, we dive caves every day. We do a lot of cave exploration. We would not dive this cave in any conditions at all. That's why there's no fixed lines in there, because it's only being done when it's dry and safe. So diving this cave is a Mount Everest of cave diving. We have to lay heavy fixed lines for about 1.5 miles into the cave, and then that was the hardest job of all. So to connect a lifeline with the kids.
Wow. There's now a doctor and a nurse that are in the cave with the boys and their coach. Can they survive in there for 3-4 months until the floodwaters recede? I mean, that's a real option right now?
They're running out of options. The conditions were quite good. The heavy pumps were doing their job. The water was receding quite a bit. It dropped 6 foot in the last days. They were hoping it would be low enough so they could literally swim the kids out. But the water has risen. Yesterday, the water came up a bit, and they're expecting heavy rain rains, which would flood the entire system. You've seen the base camps on footage. If the rain starts, these would all flood, making the distance to the entrance double, which makes it impossible to get to the kids. So yes, they would have to be literally locked up for 3-4 months until the rain stops and the water resides. They would take big packs of food with them for this time.
Real quick, Ben, you said you were surprised that they were all alive and in good condition. I think everyone probably is. Do you know anything about how they spent those 9 days in pitch black before they were found?
I have a team of doctors that are consulting me. They were a bit worried about their mental state. Obviously, 10 days with no solid food, no light, probably bats flying around against them, which is not very stimulating for the mental health. But surprisingly, yes, they were. One of the British team actually serviced there first, and they were actually talking English with them, asking them what day it is and do you have food? We're a bit hungry. So yes, they were in very, very good shape. Obviously, muscle atrophy, too weak to walk, and that's what they're doing right now, supplying them with a little bit of food and slowly getting their powers back.
It's a good news and a scary news story. I mean, all wrapped into one. Thank God they're alive. They're really up against some challenges still. Ben, thank you for what you're doing. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.